So we just want to explain that the steps involved in a coffee cherry to become a beverage. So we'll start one step at a time. The point of this video is we're gonna deep dive into all the videos later on all the topics later on. So it's important for you all to know about the topics that we're going to cover. So coffee beans are basically seeds which when planted becomes coffee trees. So when the seed is sowed, they start growing after a point of time and they actually look like, say, coffee beans stuck on a stem. That's how they're just tiny little, and then they start growing over a period of time. These plants are not really planted in the fields for the first couple of years. So I heard a estate owner calling them as soldiers. So the soldiers is basically a nursery where all these small plants are kept. A preferable weather or altitude is somewhere between, it should be cold, it should not be really having heavy rainfall or the soil erosion is a lot. You need ambient temperature of between 16 to 24 degrees Celsius approximately, and higher the altitude better would be for the coffee. So now these small plants which will be ready will be now planted into the fields along with the different other already growing coffee plants. The next step is harvesting from the trees. Alright, between the plantation and the harvesting there are a lot of things that do happen, but let's just take this as a second step. Harvesting is basically plucking the cherry from the plant. The small plant is now a bigger plant. Usually coffee plants are between 2 meters height. They can go to like 6.6, 7, 8 feet as well. So, every varietal has got a different leaf characteristic, different branching out characteristic. The shape of the tree is also different. So that is the way you basically understand which kind of coffee varietal is this plant of. What happens is there are two kinds of picking. One is the strip picking and one is a selective picking. In the strip picking, as a term says, the pickers would just strip pick the entire beans from the plants, right? Whereas the selective picking is where you have basically told your estate partner or the estate owner has clearly told the pickers about what kind of cherries have to be picked. So the pickers would go and they'll selectively pick each and every cherry towards their briefing that they've got basically. So if somebody is looking out for a complete red cherry, they'll just keep picking the red cherry and eliminate all the almost red or the green, of course. Selective picking is more expensive because you've got your own requirements. So it will be picked according to that. So that adds to the cost and that also adds to the quality and the consistency of the coffee. These coffee cherries, once harvested, they are now going to the processing station. As a baseline, let's just understand what processing is. Processing means the entire point of processing is to get the green beans out of those cherries. Cherries have got different layers. Many processes involve removing those layers. Few processes involve not removing those layers at all and just keeping the cherries along with those layers onto the ground, and then later on segregating the green beans from the parchment or the mucilage that has been dried out. So basically we're talking about processing, and there are like three kinds of basic processes that we've got. There are a lot of processes, but we just divided into three categories. One is the washed, natural and honey. There's another thing that is fruit fermentation that is happening right now globally, where basically coffee cherries are infused with different fruits and it's fermented together. So that's another kind of science and art that has come into and the coffee experience has come out fantastic as well. Next in line is now you gotta dry the beans. Once the processing is done, you gotta dry the beans. Basically beans, cherries, these are basically dried either on the patio, or there are these African raised beds that have come. African raised beds basically make sure that the air is basically going to the cherries equally from the bottom and the top, and they have to be raked constantly so that you get proper ventilation for the cherries and equal drying happens. If you've kept the cherries on the patio, probably the ground is pretty much hot and the air above is not that hot enough, so there's uneven drying happening. So that's why raised beds are something which are very, very good. So these go to the hulling station, and that is where the hulling basically takes place. Also, there are a lot of activities that happen over there, like green bean sorting, there's polishing, after which it's ready to get exported. A little bit about hulling about the hulling activity. So the green bean has got now a papery kind of a structure around it, which now needs to be separated before it goes to the roasters. So that's what happens over here. Also, when we talk about, say, grading or segregation of the beans, so let's say I've got a requirement of just AAA and I don't want any defects whatsoever in that. So there are these machines which basically would segregate the defects altogether differently and also keep the AAAs that I want in a particular fashion, and it would segregate and give it to me. So there won't be any defects, there won't be any double A's, there won't be any P berries and that. They'll be segregated in these machines. So these machines are really expensive but worth the entire work, because not everything can be hand sorted. It's just impossible. After this step, after milling is done, now these coffees are ready to be bagged and they'll to be shipped outside or to the local roasters. Then comes a very important stage, which is cupping. So cupping happens at a lot of places. It happens at the estate itself before you even finalize a lot. Cupping also happens after you have finalized a lot at the estate. Cupping also happens once you get the samples of that particular lot at your roastery. And again, cupping happens when you basically are roasting the coffees on a regular basis. Cupping is basically you'll keep tasting the coffees and you'll kind of know what is the potential of this coffee, what has gone wrong, what has gone right, what can be improved. So cupping gives you that data. So when we talk about cupping is of course done off a roasted bean. These are sample roasted in these small roasters, be it gas roasters, be it air roasters. They are primarily roasted not to profile the coffees but to understand the potential of this coffee. When I say the potential of the coffee, it means how the coffee could really taste like. So that is what cupping means. Cupping is of roasted coffee. The next step would be roasting. So this goes to the production roasting. Once you've finalized what kind of notes that you're expecting from this coffee, what kind of potential is there in this coffee, you go to the roasting side of things. You start roasting in your whatever roaster that you've got. You want it for an espresso, you want it for a filter bar, you want it for a blend, you want it for cold brew. So those kind of decisions are then made over here. And then there's a non-stop communication between the roaster and the producer as to what has exactly happened, how is the coffee being perceived by other guests at their cafe, because they are interacting with the guests a lot. So grind size changes according to the way you brew the coffee. So coffee has to be first ground and then only can you drink it. So the next step is grinding. Grinding is very important because you got to make these decisions of how much finer do you want to go, how much coarser do you want to go, which grinder do you want to buy. Don't go for a blade grinder, go for a burr grinder. So all these things come under the grinding category. So when we grind this coffee from the beans, this won't be completely dissolved, like it won't disappear in the water. That is instant coffee altogether. This we are talking about freshly roasted ground coffee. This is also called RNG, roast and ground, as against the instant coffee. And then finally this comes to your brewing table. So you can brew this coffee in mocha pot, aeropress, siphon, pour over, espresso, all these kind of beverages. Yeah, so imagine all these steps, and there are further more steps. Like there are logistics people involved. There are packaging team involved. There are a lot of people involved in bringing that small seed to your beverage. And as I keep always saying, it's almost like an impossible beverage because the amount of steps and number of steps that are there, they are just humongous. And the entire point of what we are doing is we want to like give you an entire picture of the transparency. So when you have this cup in your hand, or when you're brewing, or when you come to the cafe, or when you buy a coffee bag from the website, you can actually sip and you can literally go back to the block of the estate where the coffee came from. So that is the transparency that we want to keep. That is the kind of so that is what specialty coffee exactly means. That is what the third wave or all these waves whatever coming in, this is towards that direction. So the transparency is very important. Your traceability is more important. It just gives you more confidence in drinking and consuming what you are having.